Why did the room fall silent the moment she sat down? Not because she demanded attention, not because she looked dangerous, but because something about her stillness felt out of place among the noise. The mess hall was loud, steel trays clattering, voices colliding, boots scraping the floor like restless thoughts. Hundreds of bodies packed into long tables, all burning off nervous energy before tomorrow's training. She moved through it unnoticed at first, carrying her tray like she'd done 1,000 times before. Chicken, rice, vegetables, black coffee, no extras, no indulgence. She chose a table in the back, away from the noise, away from eyes. That was when they noticed her. 4 recruits, young, confident, fresh from surviving selection and mistaking endurance for wisdom. They sat close enough to feel bold, far enough to feel safe, the kind of confidence that hadn't yet been tested by consequence. One of them leaned back in his chair. "You lost," he said. She didn't look up. The comment hung there, waiting for reaction. It didn't get one. He tried again, louder this time, smiles spreading across the table like permission. "This is where operators eat." Still nothing. Inside her chest, her heart stayed slow, steady, the same rhythm she'd carried through dark corridors overseas, through doors that didn't open politely, through moments when hesitation meant death. She took another bite, chewed, swallowed. The chair scraped back. Now he was standing, big, used to gravity bending around him, used to people moving when he stepped forward. "Hey," he said, "I'm talking to you." That was when she finally looked up. Her eyes weren't angry, they weren't defensive, they were calm, flat, the kind of calm that came from knowing exactly how far things could go and choosing where to stop. "I'm eating," she said. Confusion flickered across his face, then irritation, pride tightening like a fist. "You need to leave." She tilted her head slightly, not challenging, curious. "Lord." That was all it took. He reached for her arm. The next few seconds unfolded faster than his pride could keep up with. Her hand caught his wrist before contact, a precise grip, no wasted movement. She stepped offline as his balance shifted, rotated his joint just enough to let pain speak for her. His body followed the pressure before his mind caught up. Gravity did the rest. He hit the floor hard, breath gone, shock louder than the impact. She knelt beside him, control without cruelty, pressure without panic. "If this were real," she said quietly so only he could hear, "you wouldn't be breathing." Then she released him. The room stayed silent. She stood, offered him a hand. And for the first time that night, he hesitated. That moment, his pause, was the beginning of everything. What kind of strength doesn't raise its voice? The answer stood beside him now, unshaken, while authority entered the room in boots worn thin by decades of service. The Master Chief didn't shout. He didn't need to. His presence cut through the space like weather moving in. "Do you know who that is?" he asked. No one answered. He said her name, her rank, her deployments, the places she'd been when excuses didn't survive contact. He listed her achievements not as praise but as fact, like coordinates on a map no one else had earned the right to walk. The recruits listened, as their assumptions collapsed under the weight of truth. "She didn't hurt you," the Master Chief said. "She taught you." That stung more than the fall. Apologies followed, awkward, uneven. One of them spoke last. He admitted his silence, admitted he'd known it was wrong and said nothing. She looked at him longer than the others. "Do better," she said. And that was it. Later, alone in her quarters, she cleaned her weapon in silence. The ritual steadied her, each motion familiar, predictable, control restored. Her phone buzzed once, a message from someone who'd walked the same roads. "Word travels fast," it read. She ignored it. Legends weren't built in mess halls. They were built in quiet moments where restraint won over ego. Sleep came fast. Morning came faster. Why did they request her specifically? She stood at the front of the room now, 63 recruits watching her with different versions of the same question in their eyes. Was she here to punish them? To prove something? To break them? She didn't answer the question they hadn't asked. "My job," she said, "is to teach you how to survive decisions you haven't made yet." She spoke about observation, about assumptions, about how confidence without awareness was just another liability. She didn't single him out by name, but everyone knew who she meant. "Last night," she said, "someone acted on incomplete information. That happens in combat, and people die for it." The room stayed still. "You will fail here," she continued. "That's the point. You fail where failure teaches, not where it kills." They trained until exhaustion blurred thought, until muscles shook and instincts argued with discipline. She corrected them quietly, precisely. She never raised her voice. One of them, same one from the mess hall, learned quickly. Strong, athletic, but now listening, adjusting. Another struggled with hesitation, freezing when information felt incomplete. She pulled him aside. "Indecision is still a decision," she said, "usually the wrong one." A third moved with caution born from saving lives, not taking them. She recognized it, explained how the same instincts applied, how prioritization wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. They didn't fear her. They trusted her. And that mattered more. When did a team stop being four individuals? It happened quietly. Not during a perfect run. Not during praise. It happened when the plan failed. A locked door. A missed step. An alarm they hadn't planned for. Chaos moved in fast. She watched from the observation room as they adapted, changed entry points, split roles, covered each other without being told. One took a hit and stayed in the fight. Another made a decision under pressure and owned it. They weren't flawless. They were learning. Afterward, she didn't congratulate them. She corrected them. That was respect. Weeks passed, pressure increased, sleep disappeared, scenarios blurred together until only instinct remained, an instinct shaped carefully held. The one who'd stayed silent learned to speak up. The one who'd hesitated learned to decide. The one who'd relied on size learned restraint. She watched them become something else. Not heroes. Operators. What survives when everything else is stripped away? Fatigue, hunger, doubt. 72 hours of sustained pressure tested what training alone couldn't. They crawled when standing was easier, waited when moving felt urgent, chose silence over speed. Mistakes happened. They adapted. When contact came, it was violent and brief. When stealth was required, they disappeared. When time ran out, they made hard calls and accepted the cost. They succeeded, not because they were exceptional, but because they trusted each other enough to act. At the end, they collapsed where they stood. No cheering, no celebration. Just quiet understanding. Why did she choose to stay? She stood watching the next class form up. New faces, same uncertainty, same potential. Someone whispered her name, someone else doubted it. She didn't correct them. She turned back toward the building where lessons were learned the hard way, without blood. She stayed because experience meant nothing if it wasn't passed on. Because strength didn't always belong on the front line. Because dignity didn't need permission. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is step forward without demanding recognition. Sometimes leadership isn't loud. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the silence feel heavier than the noise ever had? It followed her out of the mess hall like a shadow that refused to detach. Not loud, not dramatic, just present. The kind of silence that didn't come from fear, but from recalculation, from people quietly rewriting what they thought they knew. She walked with the same pace she always did, not fast, not slow, measured. Her boots struck the concrete with soft certainty as the night air cooled the heat left behind by adrenaline she never let surface. The incident was already over in her mind, filed away. Not a victory, not a loss, just information. In her quarters, the light hummed faintly as she set her tray aside and began the ritual that grounded her when everything else felt abstract. Weapon maintenance, slide off, inspect, clean, oil, reassemble, function check, each movement precise, familiar, honest. Steele didn't care about opinions. Her phone buzzed once on the desk. She didn't reach for it immediately, let it vibrate itself into silence. Messages could wait, metal couldn't. Only after the weapon was secured did she glance down. Word travels fast, the message said. You okay? She typed back a single word. Always. Sleep came quickly, but it wasn't deep. It never was. Somewhere between dreaming and waking, fragments returned uninvited. Narrow hallways, dust hanging in sunlight, the weight of responsibility pressing harder than the kid on her shoulders, faces she couldn't forget, choices she couldn't undo. When morning came, she was already awake. The alarm never startled her. It never had. Her body lived in a constant state of readiness, as if rest were a suggestion rather than a requirement. She dressed, ran, trained. 6 miles along the coast as fog rolled in low and thick, swallowing distance and sound. Each breath steady, each footfall controlled. Some of the recruits noticed her as she passed. Word had already begun to shape her into something larger than she was. A story, a warning, a myth forming where a woman had simply acted with discipline. She didn't slow. At breakfast she ate alone, again, not because she was excluded, but because solitude was efficient. It let her think, let her prepare. By the time she entered the training facility, the air had changed. Anticipation hovered like static. 63 recruits sat waiting, some straight-backed and eager, others slouched with performative confidence, a few already tired in ways they didn't understand yet. And their third row, 4 familiar faces. They didn't look at her the way they had the night before. That mattered. She stood at the front, no introduction flourish, no attempt to command attention beyond presence. My name is Lena Maravik, she said. For the next 12 weeks, I'm responsible for keeping you alive long enough to learn. A few swallowed, one smirk faded. She spoke about assumptions, about observation, about how confidence without context was a liability. Her voice never rose. It didn't need to. Silence leaned in when she spoke. You think selection proved something, she said. It didn't. It just gave you a seat at the table. She paused, letting that land. What you do with that seat determines whether you stay. Eyes flicked to the 4 men from the mess hall. She didn't look at them. She didn't have to. Training began immediately. Fundamentals, stance, movement, weapon presentation, the unglamorous work that separated amateurs from survivors. One of them, the largest, moved with brute efficiency. Strong, fast, but rigid. He relied on force instead of balance. She corrected him without softness. Relax your shoulders, she said. Tension slows you down. He tried again. Better, not perfect. Another, the quiet one, watched more than he spoke. When it was his turn, he moved deliberately, almost too carefully. His shots were accurate, but his hesitation lingered like a half-second delay between thought and action. She noticed. She always noticed. As the hours passed, fatigue peeled away performance. Small mistakes surfaced, sloppy transitions, missed cues. A few recruits grew frustrated, others grew quiet. The 4 from the night before stayed together, not by instruction, by instinct. Something had shifted between them. Pride no longer sat at the center. Awareness did. During a break, one of them approached her, the one who had reached for her arm. He stood straighter now, not rigid, intent. Petty officer, he said, thank you for today. She studied him for a moment, Not judging, assessing. You learned, she replied. That's the job. I didn't know how much I didn't know, he admitted. That's common, she said. The difference is what you do after you realize it. He nodded, left without another word. As the day deepened, scenarios grew more complex. Rooms with blind corners, hallways designed to punish impatience, role players who reacted unpredictably. The recruits began to understand how quickly confidence unraveled when certainty disappeared. One froze in a doorway, overwhelmed by conflicting information. 8 seconds passed, 8 long seconds. She stopped the exercise. In the field, she said calmly, that pause kills people. The recruit flushed, shame burned bright. She didn't pile on. You're waiting for perfect clarity, she continued. It doesn't exist. Make the best decision you can with what you have, then adapt. They ran it again. He moved. Not perfectly, but decisively. Better. By late afternoon, exhaustion had settled into bones. Sweat-soaked uniforms. Focus wavered. She watched for the moment when people stopped performing and started revealing themselves. That was where growth lived. As the room emptied at the end of the day, she remained behind, observing, processing, rewriting tomorrow based on today's failures. The 4 recruits approached together this time. No swagger, no jokes. We were wrong, one said, simply, no defense. She nodded once. Being wrong isn't fatal, she said. Refusing to learn is. They left quieter than they arrived. That night, as she cleaned her weapon again, her phone buzzed. Another message, different sender, someone who'd stood beside her overseas. Heard you took on a class, it read. That takes a different kind of strength. She didn't reply. Strength didn't need acknowledgement, it needed purpose. Lying in her rack, she stared at the ceiling as sleep crept in slowly this time. Doubt surfaced, not about her ability, but about the weight of responsibility she'd accepted. Teaching meant watching people fail before they succeeded. It meant caring enough to push when walking away was easier. It meant staying. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow would test them harder. And it would test her patience even more. But she would be there. Because sometimes leadership wasn't about stepping forward in the moment of crisis. Sometimes it was about standing still long enough for others to rise. What happens when confidence finally runs out, and there's nothing left to hide behind? It didn't happen all at once. It never does. It began with fatigue. The kind that didn't announce itself with shaking hands or heavy breathing, but with small mistakes, missed angles, delayed reactions, words spoken half a second too late over comms, the kind of fatigue that crept in quietly and waited for ego to make room. By the start of the 4th week, the recruits were no longer excited. They were alert, wary. Their bodies ached in places they hadn't known could ache. Their minds felt crowded, overloaded with information that refused to sort itself neatly. That was when the real training began. She watched them from behind reinforced glass as teams moved through complex multi-room scenarios. No clean layouts anymore. No predictable threat placement. Furniture was rearranged between runs. Lighting changed without warning. Sometimes there were hostages. Sometimes there were. Sometimes the threat didn't appear at all. Patience was tested harder than aggression. One team rushed. They cleared fast, loud, confident. And wrong. A role player stepped out from behind a blind corner and marked 2 of them before they could react. She stopped the exercise immediately. Why did that happen? She asked. No one answered. Because you assumed speed would protect you, she continued. It won't. Awareness does. She reset the scenario. Run it again. The same team moved slower this time. Not hesitant, intentional. They communicated, covered angles. One called out uncertainty instead of pretending it wasn't there. They finished clean. She nodded once. Progress. The four from the mess hall, she stopped thinking of them that way, though the memory lingered, had changed more than most. Not dramatically, not theatrically, but in the way that mattered. They spoke less over each other, listened more. When one made a mistake, the others didn't mock it. They absorbed it, adjusted. Leadership was forming, quietly, unevenly. During one scenario, the largest among them took a hit early. A sim round struck his shoulder hard enough to sting through padding. Pain flared. Surprise followed. He didn't drop out. He adjusted his position, shifted to cover, and kept communicating. His voice stayed steady. That alone told her something important. Afterward, she pulled him aside. "You took a hit," she said. "Yes, petty officer. And I stayed functional." She studied his face. Sweat streaked with frustration, but there was no excuse waiting behind his eyes. "That's resilience," she said, "not toughness. Don't confuse the two." He nodded. The lesson landed. Another struggled more deeply. The one who hesitated, who needed certainty like oxygen. Every ambiguous sound slowed him. Every shadow became a question he wanted answered before moving. In one scenario, that hesitation cost them time they didn't have. She didn't raise her voice. She never did. Instead, she sat beside him after the run, both of them on the edge of a mat, weapons cleared and set aside. "You're waiting for permission," she said. He frowned. "Permission to act," she clarified. "You want the situation to tell you what to do. It won't." He stared at the floor. "I don't want to make the wrong call." She exhaled slowly. "Inaction is a call," she said, "and it's usually the worst one." He swallowed. The weight of that truth pressed down harder than any physical punishment. "I'll try," he said. "You will," she replied, "and you'll fail, then you'll learn." The quiet one, the one who had admitted his silence that first night, was changing too, slowly, deliberately. He still spoke less than the others, but when he did, people listened. His observations were sharp, his suggestions grounded. In one scenario, he noticed something the others missed, a reflection in a window, a pattern in movement. He spoke up. The team adjusted. They avoided an ambush. Later, she caught his eye across the room. He nodded once, gratitude, confidence beginning to replace doubt. Week by week, the pressure increased. Low light, confined spaces, physical exhaustion layered over cognitive overload. They ran scenarios after long conditioning evolutions, forced decision-making when lungs burned and vision narrowed. Some cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically. They just stopped improving. She noticed those too. Not everyone belonged here. That wasn't cruelty. It was reality. The job didn't forgive misplaced ambition. One recruit dropped from the cycle after a panic response during a confined space scenario. Another withdrew voluntarily, recognizing limits before they became liabilities. She respected that. Quitting wasn't always failure. Sometimes it was honesty. By the midpoint of the cycle, the room felt different. Less noise, less posturing, more intention. She addressed them one morning before training began. "You're past the point where physical strength matters most," she said. "Now it's about judgment, and judgment doesn't care how strong you are." She didn't mention gender. She didn't mention the night in the mess hall. She didn't need to. They understood now. That afternoon, she watched the four work through a particularly complex evolution. Multiple rooms, conflicting audio cues, a simulated hostage who screamed at the wrong moment. Chaos tried to take over. They didn't let it. They slowed just enough to think, fast enough to act. They communicated in short bursts, clear, controlled. When it was over, she entered the room. "You adapted," she said. "That's the point." One of them, no longer just the loud one, asked a question instead of making a statement. "What could we have done better?" She paused. You could have trusted each other sooner, she said. You still hesitate to rely on shared awareness. That comes with time. He nodded, not defensive, curious. That night, alone again, she felt the familiar ache behind her ribs, the one that came when responsibility settled deep. Teaching was different than leading in combat. In combat, the threat was external, clear, immediate. Here, the threat was internal, ego, fear, doubt. And she couldn't eliminate those with precision or force. Only patience. She thought of the teams she'd lost, the ones who hadn't had this kind of preparation, the moments where someone froze or rushed or assumed and paid for it. Training saved lives. Not hypothetically, literally. Her phone buzzed again, a message she hadn't expected. It was from the recruit who'd frozen earlier in the week. "Thank you for not giving up on me." She stared at the words longer than necessary. She typed back, "Don't thank me yet, earn it." Sleep came slowly. Tomorrow would be harder. And somewhere between exhaustion and resolve, she understood something she hadn't allowed herself to consider before. This shaping of minds under pressure, this quiet transformation, mattered as much as any mission she'd ever run. Maybe more. Because sometimes the most important battles weren't fought overseas. They were fought here, in rooms designed to teach people who they really were, before the world forced them to find out the hard way. What happens when preparation collides with the unexpected, and there's no time to recover? The exercise wasn't on the schedule. That alone should have warned them. They just finished a brutal overnight evolution. Minimal sleep, rotating watches, decision drills run on fumes and stubbornness. By dawn, most of them moved on autopilot, minds dulled by repetition and exhaustion. The instructors dismissed them without ceremony. Or so they thought. As they drifted toward the barracks, alarms cut through the morning air. Not the sharp, familiar tone of training resets, but the long, rolling signal reserved for full mobilization exercises. Confusion rippled through the group. She was already moving. Her voice came over the loudspeaker, calm and unhurried. "Gear up, full kit. You have 5 minutes." 5 minutes wasn't generous. It was deliberate. The recruits ran, not with panic but urgency sharpened by experience. Muscle memory took over, plates locked, weapons checked, radios clipped, no wasted motion. By the time they assembled, breath fogged the air and adrenaline burned through fatigue. She stood in front of them, unreadable. "This is not a drill you win by speed," she said. "It's one you survive by judgment." They were divided into elements, objectives vague by design, sparse intel, conflicting updates fed through comms as they moved. The environment was unfamiliar, not the polished training facility, but an abandoned industrial zone near the coast, crumbling concrete, rusted stairwells, long sightlines broken by shadow and debris. Realistic, unforgiving. The four were assigned together again, not coincidence, not favoritism. She wanted to see what pressure would do to what they'd become. As they advanced, things unraveled quickly. A radio malfunction cut one of them off from the net. A simulated injury slowed another. The sun climbed, heat pressing down, compounding fatigue. Information stopped making sense. They reached a junction 2 routes forward, one shorter, one safer. Intel conflicted. Seconds stretched. The old instinct surfaced, the urge to rush, to choose motion over thought. This time they didn't. The quiet one spoke first. "Something's wrong with the shorter route." No proof, just observation. "What?" another asked. "Too quiet," he replied. "Feels staged." They took the longer path. It cost them time. It saved them. An ambush triggered on the route they avoided. They heard it, sim rounds snapping against metal, instructors calling hits. Another team neutralized within seconds. The four exchanged looks, no celebration, just understanding. Later, the injured one began to lag. His movements slowed, breathing ragged. "I'm good," he said automatically. She watched from a distance, tracking every decision through live feeds. She saw the moment they recognized the lie. They didn't argue, they adapted. Roles shifted, load redistributed, pace adjusted. No heroics. That mattered. At the objective, a mock extraction under pressure, they encountered chaos. Role players screaming, conflicting orders, a ticking clock designed to overwhelm. One froze. Not the hesitant one this time, but the loudest, the one who used to lead with presence rather than clarity. His eyes darted, noise crowded his thoughts. She felt the tension tighten in her chest. Would they cover for him? Or would they break? The hesitant one stepped in, took command without raising his voice. "Breathe," he said. "Left sector's yours, I've got point." The order was simple, grounded. It worked. The loud one nodded. Focus returned, they moved. They completed the extraction with seconds to spare. When it was over, they collapsed behind cover, lungs burning, sweat blinding. She approached them then. Not smiling, not stern. "Why did that work?" she asked. No one answered immediately. Finally, the quiet one spoke. "Because we trusted each other." She nodded. "Trust isn't blind," she said. "It's earned and it's fragile." She turned to the loud one, held his gaze. "You froze," she said. "Yes, petty officer." "And I was overloaded," he admitted. "I lost clarity." She waited. "I should have said something sooner," he continued, "instead of trying to push through." She let the silence stretch. "Pushing through works until it doesn't," she said. "The team carries you when you let it." He swallowed, the lesson cut deeper than any reprimand. As they regrouped, she moved off to the edge of the site, watched other teams recover, some frustrated, some shaken, some already arguing. Her phone vibrated, a message from command. "Evaluation looks strong. They're asking about you." She stared at the screen, then locked it. Evaluation wasn't why she stayed. Later, back at the facility, she debriefed the class. "You don't fail because you're weak," she told them. "You fail because you hide weakness." No one laughed. No one shifted uncomfortably. They understood. That night she sat alone on the steps outside her quarters, ocean air heavy with salt. The horizon glowed faintly with the last of the sun. She felt tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. The kind of tired that came from caring deeply and pretending it didn't matter. She thought of the moment in the field when the loud one froze, of the split second where everything balanced on whether the team would fracture or adapt. They adapted. That wasn't an accident. She helped shape that. The realization didn't make her proud. It made her careful. Because shaping people meant owning the outcome, good or bad. She stayed there until darkness fully settled, the sounds of the bass fading into rhythm. Tomorrow, the stakes would rise again. And she would be there. Not to be seen. Not to be remembered. But to make sure they were ready for a world that wouldn't slow down when they needed it to. What do you do when the mission stops being an exercise and starts feeling personal? The shift was subtle at first, almost polite. No alarms this time, no shouted orders cutting through the air, just a briefing room filled with low light and quiet concentration. The kind of quiet that didn't come from exhaustion but from anticipation. The recruits sat straighter now, not rigid, ready. She stood near the screen, arms crossed, eyes scanning faces she'd come to know in fragments, strengths here, fractures there. People shaped by pressure, people still learning where they broke. "This evolution will not reset," she said. "If you fail, you adapt. If you adapt poorly, the consequences remain." A pause. "Treat it like it's real." That was all. The scenario unfolded across a simulated coastal village, narrow alleys, civilians mixed with threats, ambiguous objectives layered with incomplete intelligence, no clean villains, no simple answers. The kind of environment that punished certainty. They deployed before dawn, the sky washed in gray-blue light that made distances lie. The air smelled of salt and rust. Wind tugged at loose fabric, whispering distractions. She observed remotely, feeds split across monitors, tracking movement patterns, decision points, hesitation. Her focus narrowed until the rest of the world blurred. The four moved with practiced coordination now, not flashy, efficient, their spacing clean, communication short and precise. They encountered their first moral friction early. A role player, a civilian, blocked their path, frantic, screaming, pointing in conflicting directions, information tangled in fear. Time bled away. The loud one stepped forward, instinct urging him to push past. The quiet one raised a hand. "Slow," he said, "something off." They scanned, not just the person but the environment, a door ajar, footprints that didn't match the civilian's panic. They rerouted, lost time, gained clarity. An ambush triggered seconds later, where they would have been. She exhaled slowly. That choice hadn't been easy. Later another test came, one designed to hurt. They were ordered to hold a position while another element moved ahead. Minutes passed, then longer. Radio traffic grew chaotic. Reports of casualties simulated but convincing enough to tighten chests. Then came the call. Command instructed them to withdraw, immediately. But they could hear it, screams, just out of range, a choice disguised as an order. The hesitant one froze again, but not like before. This wasn't uncertainty, it was conflict. "If we leave now," he said, voice low, "they don't make it." The loud one looked torn. Old instincts surged, follow orders, don't question. The injured one shifted his weight, pain flaring, eyes hard. "We can't save everyone," he said. Silence stretched. She watched the debate unfold, heart steady but heavy. This was the line training could approach but never fully cross. The quiet one spoke again. "Orders matter," he said, "but so does judgment." They requested clarification, bought seconds, weighed risk, adjusted plan. They moved. Fast, controlled, not reckless. They intervened, created a window, pulled the other element out under pressure, took simulated losses in the process. The scenario ended abruptly. They stood there, breathing hard, adrenaline still sharp, waiting for the reprimand they were sure was coming. It didn't. In the debrief, she didn't praise them. She questioned them. "Why did you move?" she asked. "Because it was the right thing," someone said. She shook her head slightly. "That's not an answer," she replied. "That's a feeling." They tried again, spoke about probability, about risk management, about human cost versus mission integrity. She listened. When they finished, she nodded once. "You'll never have perfect information," she said. "What matters is whether you can live with the consequences of the choices you make." That night the base felt quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that followed emotional exertion, not physical. She sat alone in the briefing room long after everyone left, staring at the map still projected on the wall, lines drawn and erased, paths chosen and avoided. Her phone buzzed. A message from command again. "Operational unit requesting your assessment. Potential deployment advisor role." She didn't respond. Instead, she thought of the coastal village scenario, of the moment they chose to move, not because they were told to, but because they believed they could. That belief was dangerous and necessary. She remembered a real village once, different coast, different war, a choice she'd made under similar pressure, a choice that saved some and cost others. The weight of that memory settled in her chest, familiar and unwelcome. Training could prepare people to make choices. It couldn't prepare them to carry them. The next day the recruits looked different, quieter, thoughtful, less interested in proving anything. One approached her after training, the hesitant one. "I still don't know if we did the right thing," he said. She met his gaze. "You won't always," she replied. "Anyone who claims certainty is lying to themselves or to you." He nodded slowly. "But you'll make the call anyway?" he asked. "Yes," she said, "because not choosing is still a choice." He absorbed that in silence. As the final evaluations approached, pressure mounted again, but it was different now. Less frantic, more focused. They weren't chasing approval. They were chasing clarity. She saw it in how they prepared, in how they corrected each other without ego, in how they rested when rest mattered and pushed when it didn't. They were becoming something she trusted. That realization scared her more than it pleased her. Trust meant investment, and investment meant loss was possible. On the eve of the final exercise, she stood outside once more, ocean wind cool against her face, the horizon dark, endless. Her phone buzzed one last time. Command awaited her response. She turned it off. Tomorrow wasn't about her future. It was about theirs. And when the moment came, when pressure peaked and uncertainty closed in, she needed to be fully present. Not as an instructor, not as a symbol, but as someone who understood that strength wasn't about never doubting. It was about moving forward anyway, even when the cost was unclear. Especially then, what remains when the test is over and no one is watching anymore? Dawn arrived without ceremony. No alarms, no shouted commands, just a pale line of light cutting across the horizon, steady and indifferent. The final evolution had been running through their minds all night, even if sleep had pretended to visit. They gathered in silence, gear already checked, faces set with a calm that came from understanding, not confidence. She stood off to the side as they formed up, not in front, not above, watching the way they stood now, the way they carried weight differently, less bravado, more intention. "This is the last run," she said. "There will be no feedback until it's over." They nodded, no one asked questions. The scenario was simple on paper, too simple. Insert, observe, extract, minimal contact preferred, minimal footprint required. Reality complicated it immediately. The terrain worked against them. Uneven ground, limited cover, weather shifting just enough to distort sound. Intel gaps widened as they moved deeper. They adjusted without being told. At the first friction point, the quiet one took point, not because he wanted to lead, but because it made sense. The loud one covered rear security without comment. The injured one, fully recovered now, handled comms with clarity and restraint. The hesitant one moved with decisiveness born from hard-earned scars. She watched it all from the control room, hands clasped behind her back, heart steady but heavy. They encountered a civilian presence earlier than expected, not hostile, just present, lives intersecting with mission lines that didn't care who got in the way. They slowed, chose patience over speed. Time bled. Command pressure mounted. They held. That choice cost them their original extraction window. A new one opened shorter, riskier. They took it. On the approach, contact finally came. Not overwhelming, not cinematic, just enough to disrupt rhythm, to test discipline. They didn't chase. They contained, moved through without escalating. At the extraction point, the final complication waited. One of them was hit. The scenario didn't pause. The injured one went down hard, breath knocked out of him, pain real enough to matter. For a split second, the old instincts flared, finish the mission, leave the casualty, meet the clock. She felt her jaw tighten. This was the moment. They regrouped fast, voices low, focus sharp. "We can carry," someone said. "We'll miss the window," another replied. The injured one shook his head. "Go." The quiet one looked at him, really looked. "No," he said, "we move together." They improvised, shifted load, adjusted route, signaled delay. They arrived at the extraction point seconds late. The clock ran out. Silence followed. In the control room, instructors exchanged glances. Some frowned, some nodded. One looked at her, waiting. She said nothing. The recruits stood where they were, breathing hard, shoulders sagging, not from defeat but from release. They didn't know yet. That was intentional. Later in the debrief room, they sat across from her one last time. She didn't start immediately. Let the quiet do its work. "You missed the extraction," she said finally. No one argued. "Yes, petty officer," the loud one said. "Why?" she asked. "We chose to carry our own," the hesitant one replied. She nodded. "You understand the cost?" she asked. "Yes," the injured one said. "We failed the timeline." She leaned forward slightly. "And what did you succeed at?" No one answered at first. Then the quiet one spoke. "Each other." The words settled into the room like something earned. She held their gaze, one by one. "You will be evaluated as a unit," she said. "Not on whether you met a clock, but on whether you understood what mattered." They didn't celebrate, they didn't exhale. They waited. The results came later, passed, not flawless, not exemplary in every metric, but trusted. That mattered more. When it was over, when papers were signed and futures set in motion, they found her outside, standing where the ocean met concrete, wind tugging at her sleeves. None of them spoke at first. Finally, the loud one stepped forward. "We wouldn't be here without you," he said. She shook her head gently. "You would," she replied, "just slower and with more bruises." A faint smile passed between them, brief, honest. The quiet one nodded. "You taught us how to see." She considered that. "I taught you to pay attention," she said. "You chose what to do with it." They left not long after. New assignments, new paths, new weight to carry. She stayed. Days passed. The base returned to its rhythm. New recruits arrived, loud and uncertain. The cycle reset. Command followed up again. Advisor role confirmed. Higher visibility, more recognition. She declined. Instead, she walked the training floors alone one evening, listening to echoes of boots that weren't there anymore. She paused at the doorway of the room where it had started, where 4 recruits had mistaken silence for weakness. She didn't resent them for it. Everyone learns differently. Her phone buzzed one last time, a message from an unknown number. "We made it together." She stared at the words for a long moment before slipping the phone back into her pocket. Outside, the horizon burned orange, then softened into dusk. She breathed in the salt air, felt the quiet settle, not the heavy kind but the earned kind. She understood something now that had taken years to arrive. Strength wasn't volume. Authority wasn't dominance. And leadership wasn't about standing in front when things went right. Sometimes it was about standing still when others underestimated you. Sometimes it was about letting action speak when words would only cheapen the truth. Sometimes dignity didn't announce itself. It didn't demand space. It didn't ask permission. It simply acted.